Welcome to another deep dive, and this time we're going to be tackling the history of Buddhism in Ceylon, specifically looking at this text called the Mahāvaṃsa.
Right.
It's kind of a chronicle, lots of stories about kings and monks and all these events that really shaped Ceylon's destiny. And one thing that really caught my eye as I was kind of looking through this, it mentions a king who was like so devoted to Buddhism that he actually built a 9-story temple that was made entirely of bronze.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think we have a lot to unpack here. But I think the best place to start would be with the arrival of Buddhism in Ceylon. Like, how did it all begin?
Well, it's interesting because the Mahāvaṃsa kind of blends history with these really fantastic elements, which I think reflects, the beliefs of the people who wrote it. Like, for example, it talks about this legendary visit of the Buddha himself to Ceylon. And it says that he, pacified these powerful nature spirits called yakas and established sacred sites, almost like he was, kind of prepping the ground for Buddhism to arrive later on.
So he was like a spiritual pioneer, kind of, getting everything ready for this new belief system to come in.
Exactly.
It's interesting how even in these legendary figures, they're always portrayed as taking some kind of, concrete action.
Yeah. But, the real turning point, I think, comes with the arrival of this guy named Mahinda, who was the son of Emperor Ashoka in India.
Oh, yeah. Fuck it.
And he's the one who formally introduced Buddhism to King Devanampiatissa in Ceylon. And this really kind of set off like a transformation in the island's religious landscape.
Okay, so Ashoka, I mean, he's the one who famously embraced Buddhism after all those years of conquest,
Right.
Sending his son over to Ceylon. It feels like a pretty deliberate strategy to try to solidify Buddhism's influence there. Do you think there were any political implications to this too? Ceylon suddenly becoming pretty closely tied with this massive empire in India.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think, the arrival of the sacred Bodhi tree really kind of solidified that connection even further. This tree was brought over by Sanghamitta, who was Mahinda's sister.
Okay.
And it was said to be a sapling from the very tree that the Buddha himself sat under when he attained enlightenment.
Wow.
So imagine having a piece of that, a living piece of the Buddha's enlightenment planted right there on your soil.
Yeah, it's almost like a direct link back to the source of Buddhism itself. Speaking of connections, I know we mentioned earlier that King Devanampiatissa constructed this Mahavihara.
Yeah.
What was it about this complex that made it so significant?
Oh, the Mahavihara was huge. Think of it kind of like an ancient university. It became this melting pot of Buddhist scholarship, and it attracted monks from all over the Buddhist world.
Okay.
So Devanampiatissa's patronage really kind of spurred Ceylon on its way to becoming a major center of Buddhist learning and practice.
So it seems like kings played a pretty important role in all of this, I remember we also mentioned King Duttagamani as well. What made his reign so notable?
Well, Duttagamani, this warrior king, he's really remembered for defending Ceylon against these Tamil invaders. And he was extremely devout when it came to Buddhism. The Mahāvaṃsa describes him, building all these magnificent stupas, like the Ruwanweli Dagoba, to house these sacred relics of the Buddha. And get this, he actually even participated in the construction himself, alongside all the workers, just showing his humility and devotion.
Hold on, wait a minute. So the king himself was out there doing manual labor on a religious structure.
Yeah.
That's a pretty powerful statement about, the intertwining of religious devotion and leadership, in ancient Ceylon.
Exactly.
Was that a common practice?
I mean, not every king was as hands-on as Duttagamani, but,
Yeah.
His actions really highlight how deeply Buddhism had permeated the culture, even at the highest levels of society. These kings, they weren't just, converts. They were actively shaping Buddhism's trajectory in Ceylon.
So it seems like,
Yeah.
maybe the Buddha planted the seed, but it was the kings who really nurtured it. They turned Ceylon into this fertile ground for Buddhism to flourish. But I'm curious though, the Mahāvaṃsa seems to focus a lot on the grandeur of Buddhism's arrival, but some scholars argue that it might downplay the role of the pre-existing beliefs that were already in Ceylon at the time. How do we reconcile that with, the mentions of yakas and stuff?
That's what makes the Mahāvaṃsa so interesting, right?
Right.
Because while it's celebrating Buddhism's triumphs, it also acknowledges these pre-Buddhist beliefs that were already there. Like the yakas, those nature spirits, they remained part of the cultural landscape. Their presence kind of hints at this more complex religious tapestry. where Buddhism didn't necessarily like erase everything that came before it. It kind of had to find a place within those existing beliefs.
So almost like a merging of the old and the new, where Buddhism had to adapt and, integrate with what was already there.
Right.
That makes you think about, the complexity of all these religious transformations throughout history.
Absolutely.
And I imagine that Ceylon's own political landscape, with all its invasions and power struggles and stuff, probably had a pretty big impact on how Buddhism evolved on the island too, right?
Oh, definitely.
So it sounds like we're about to enter a period of, I don't know, turmoil and change, maybe? A real test of Buddhism's resilience. But before we get into that, I'm curious, how did the Buddhist community in Ceylon make sure that the Buddha's teachings were, preserved and transmitted accurately through all this? Especially in an era long before, printing presses and the internet.
Yeah. Well, that's where we get into the fascinating role of these Buddhist councils.
Yeah.
So imagine, periodically, they would hold these councils, bringing together monks from all over the place to address disputes, clarify interpretations of the teachings, and just generally make sure that everything stayed true to, the essence of what the Buddha taught.
So it was like a system of checks and balances to maintain the core principles of Buddhism, even as the world around it was changing.
Yeah, you could say that.
That's incredibly forward-thinking for that time.
And these councils, they had far-reaching effects, shaping the evolution of Buddhist thought and practice, not just in Ceylon, but across the whole Buddhist world.
Wow. So then, were all of the councils equally important? Or was there one that had, a more significant impact on Buddhism in Ceylon?
The Mahāvaṃsa specifically points to the Third Buddhist Council.
Yeah.
This one was convened by Emperor Ashoka himself.
Yeah.
And it brought together thousands of monks. The goal was to settle disagreements and compile, a definitive version of the Buddhist teachings.
Ashoka again. His influence was huge. Do you think there were any, unintended consequences to this, though? Establishing this, standardized canon?
Right.
It's definitely important for unity, but it could also be seen as a way to, consolidate power and control the interpretation of the teachings.
Right. I think it's important to consider those political nuances, even when you're dealing with something that seems purely religious.
Yeah, so even something as straightforward as preserving teachings, there are still these political undercurrents at play. This is really revealing the multifaceted nature of history, isn't it?
Absolutely.
So this third council, it really did have a substantial impact. It helped establish the standardized Buddhist canon, which then, Ashoka spread through his missionaries, further expanding his influence. But Ceylon wasn't just a passive recipient in all this, right? I remember that the Mahāvaṃsa actually mentioned Ceylon's role in preserving Buddhist teaching.
Right. The Mahāvaṃsa actually credits this scholar monk named Moggaliputta, who played a key role in that third council with composing the Kathavaku. It's a super important Buddhist philosophical text that tackles all sorts of complex doctrinal points. And it really showcases the vibrant intellectual culture that was flourishing in Ceylon's Buddhist community at that time.
So Ceylon wasn't just adopting Buddhism, they were actively engaging with it and contributing to its, intellectual and philosophical development. It's fascinating how this relatively small island nation played such a vital role in the larger story of Buddhism.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. Ceylon really became this hub of Buddhist learning, a guardian of the Dharma. And the Mahāvaṃsa really gives us a glimpse into that world. It showcases the monks' dedication to studying and preserving the Buddha's teachings.
That's really inspiring, actually, that even during a time of so much change and uncertainty, the pursuit of knowledge and understanding remained paramount. But let's be real, no historical journey is without its bumps in the road, right? I know we've talked about those Tamil invasions a bit, but were there other threats to Buddhism's rise in Ceylon?
Well, you're right. It wasn't always smooth sailing. The Mahāvaṃsa might celebrate Buddhism's triumphs, but it also acknowledges those periods of real turmoil and struggle.
It's those struggles, those setbacks, I think, that often reveal a society's true character, don't you think? How did Buddhism in Ceylon navigate all of these challenges?
That's a good question. Well, like we discussed, those Tamil invasions were a constant threat, disrupting stability and putting all those Buddhist institutions at risk. But the challenges also came from within the Buddhist community itself. Those doctrinal disputes, different interpretations of the teachings, those kinds of things.
So both external forces and internal disagreements. How did Buddhism in Ceylon manage to, survive and even flourish amidst all of that?
Well, what's really striking in the Mahāvaṃsa is how it shows Buddhism's resilience and adaptability. despite all those trials, the faith didn't just survive. It often emerged stronger from those periods of adversity.
So it's almost like a recurring cycle of challenges and triumphs, like a dance between adversity and resilience. But can you give me like a specific example of how Buddhism in Ceylon faced and overcame one of those challenges?
Sure. Take the conflict with those Tamil invaders, for instance. The Mahāvaṃsa describes how Buddhist kings, like Duttha Gamani, rallied their people, defending both the island and the Dharma. Their victories were seen as not just military achievements, but like affirmations of faith, that their cause was righteous.
So these conflicts, they were devastating, but they also kind of became these rallying points, didn't they? Uniting the Sinhalese population under this banner of Buddhism. Do you think that unity came at a cost, though? Like, were there any unintended consequences of framing the conflict in these religious terms?
That's a good point.
Yeah.
It's possible that while it was unifying, it might also deepen divisions between different religious communities on the island.
Right.
It raises some tough questions about the role of religion in conflict.
Yeah.
And the long-term effects of, framing political struggles in religious terms.
Yeah, it seems like every triumph, every obstacle overcome often brings with it this whole new set of complexities and challenges. This reminds me that history is rarely just a simple story of like good versus evil. It's way more complicated than that.
Right.
It's this tapestry woven from countless threads of actions and consequences. And those consequences often have unforeseen and long-lasting impacts.
You've hit the nail on the head. It's that complexity, that interplay of forces and consequences that makes history so captivating.
Yeah.
And in the case of Buddhism in Ceylon, this intricate dance between challenge and adaptation, it would continue to shape its journey, leading to even more evolution and transformation.
Ooh. Sounds like we've only just scratched the surface of this story. But before we move on, I'm curious, does the Mahāvaṃsa offer any insights beyond just, straight historical accounts?
Well, that's where it gets really interesting.
Yeah.
Because the Mahāvaṃsa isn't just a historical record. It's also a literary and religious text. It's infused with all these Buddhist values. And it offers this incredible glimpse into, the mindset of the people in ancient Ceylon.
Okay, now I'm intrigued. So, how does the Mahāvaṃsa go beyond just recounting historical events? What else can we glean from it about the people who wrote it?
Well, for example, notice how the text really emphasizes the karmic consequences of actions.
Yeah.
It's highlighting that Buddhist principle of cause and effect.
Right.
Good deeds lead to positive outcomes. Bad deeds lead to suffering.
Yeah.
And this moral framework, it just pervades the narrative. It shapes the way that events and characters are portrayed.
So it's not just about what happened, but also about the why, right? It's offering a Buddhist lens through which to understand the forces driving history.
Exactly. And it also highlights the importance of merit-making, particularly supporting the Sangha, the monastic community. You see kings and everyday people being praised for their generosity towards monks, for their contributions to temples and monasteries. This shows just how significant the Sangha was in ancient Ceylon.
It's almost like a guidebook encouraging people to accumulate good karma through actions that support the monastic community. But there's also this big element of mythology woven into the Mahāvaṃsa too. How do we reconcile that with its historical accounts?
Well, the Mahāvaṃsa is full of these tales of divine interventions, miraculous events, encounters with beings from other realms. And these stories, they're not just for entertainment. They reflect the influence of Buddhist cosmology and beliefs about the unseen world.
So it's this fascinating blend of history, religious teachings, and mythology, all woven together to create this really compelling narrative that reinforces Buddhist values and beliefs. But does that mean that? Should we view these events as factual, symbolic, or somewhere in between?
That's the question that's been puzzling scholars for centuries, and it's exactly what makes the Mahāvaṃsa so fascinating to study. It's this multi-layered text. You can read it on so many different levels. It's a historical chronicle, sure, but it's also a window into the worldview, the values, the aspirations of the people who created it. It really challenges us to think about the nature of history itself and how different cultures blend together, fact, belief, and narrative, to try to make sense of their world.
It reminds us that historical texts, they're not just about dry facts and figures. They're about exploring the beliefs and values, the worldviews that shape how those facts are presented and interpreted.
Exactly.
Wow. I gotta admit, I started this deep dive knowing very little about Ceylon's history, but I'm already gaining this newfound appreciation for the rich tapestry of culture and religion and political intrigue that shaped this island nation.
Yeah, that's the power of a good story. And the Mahāvaṃsa has plenty of them.
It's been a truly enlightening journey so far, and I'm really eager to delve deeper into the twists and turns of Ceylon's Buddhist history, with you as our guide, of course.
I'm happy to be your guide. And remember, this is just the beginning of our exploration. There's a whole world of fascinating history out there waiting to be discovered.
That's a great point, and I think that's a perfect place to take a break. We'll be back soon to continue our deep dive. Stay tuned. It's incredible how much we've already uncovered just from these excerpts of the Mahāvaṃsa. It's clear that this text is like a treasure trove of information about Buddhist history in Ceylon. But, it is written from a very distinctly Buddhist perspective, right? So how can we be sure that it's presenting like a balanced view of history? Are there other voices, other perspectives that might be missing from this account?
Yeah, that's a really important question. And it's where, critical thinking becomes so essential. Because the Mahāvaṃsa, as we've been discussing, it's a product of its time and place. It's shaped by the beliefs and the worldview of its authors. So it's a valuable window into Buddhist Ceylon for sure.
Yeah.
But we have to remember that it's just one perspective on a history that was probably much more multifaceted.
So how do we account for those missing vases then, those alternative perspectives? Where do we even begin to look for them?
Well, there are a few avenues we can explore. Firstly, we can look at other historical sources from the same period. Are there any chronicles or inscriptions or texts that offer, different viewpoints, maybe accounts from Tamil sources, or even records from neighboring kingdoms that interacted with Ceylon? Comparing and contrasting these different sources can help us to construct a more nuanced understanding of what actually happened.
So it's like we're assembling a puzzle, gathering clues from all these different sources, trying to reveal a more complete picture.
Exactly. And then there's archaeology, excavations, artifacts, the physical remains of ancient structures. These can all provide really valuable insights that might challenge or even corroborate the accounts that we find in texts like the Mahāvaṃsa.
So it's about going beyond the text itself, seeking clues in the physical world to kind of like fill in those gaps or offer alternative interpretations.
Right.
But I imagine that this kind of like historical detective work can be pretty challenging.
Yeah, it definitely can be. But luckily, there are entire fields dedicated to this kind of historical research. You have historians, archaeologists, epigraphists. These people spend their careers piecing together these fragments of the past. They compare sources, they analyze evidence, and they're constantly refining our understanding of history. It's a process that's always evolving, always changing, with new discoveries and emerging perspectives.
It's fascinating to think about all the effort and dedication that goes into like uncovering these mysteries of the past. It really highlights the importance of critical thinking and questioning assumptions, especially when we're dealing with historical accounts that might reflect certain biases or agendas.
Absolutely. Approaching history with an open mind, acknowledging the limitations of our sources, and constantly seeking a more complete and accurate understanding of the past. I think that's crucial. And that's the beauty of it, really. History is never a finished story. It's an ongoing conversation, a constant process of discovery and reinterpretation.
I love that way of thinking about it. It really makes history feel much more dynamic and engaging, always open to new insights and new perspectives. So as we wrap up this deep dive into the Mahāvaṃsa and the history of Buddhism in Ceylon, I have to ask, what's the takeaway for us, the listeners? Why should we care about this, ancient story? What makes it relevant to our lives today?
That's the million-dollar question, right? But I think what's really fascinating about the Mahāvaṃsa is that even though it's a text from another time and place, it actually grapples with themes and challenges that are still so relevant today.
Okay, I'm listening.
Think about some of the challenges that Buddhism in Ceylon faced. Invasions, internal conflicts, doctrinal disputes, the need to adapt to changing circumstances. These are all issues that societies around the world are still grappling with.
You're right. Those are universal challenges.
Exactly. And the Mahāvaṃsa offers us not just a historical account of those struggles, but also a glimpse into how people found meaning and resilience in the face of adversity. The emphasis on karma, for instance, it encourages personal responsibility and ethical conduct, suggesting that our actions have consequences that ripple outward, affecting others.
So it's not just about the historical events themselves. It's also about these like enduring values and principles that can guide us through our own challenges in life.
Yeah.
But how much can we really apply these, ancient values to our modern, complex world?
That's a question that each listener has to grapple with on their own, I think. But I think it's worth considering that while the world has changed dramatically, the fundamental questions of human existence,
Yeah.
they remain remarkably consistent. You know, how do we navigate conflict? How do we make sense of suffering? What is our responsibility to ourselves and to each other? The Mahāvaṃsa, in its exploration of these themes, through the lens of Buddhist Ceylon, it offers some really valuable insights that I think we can still learn from today. Maybe not as a blueprint, necessarily, but as a source of inspiration and reflection.
That makes sense. It encourages us to think about how those ancient values might manifest in our own modern context and how we can learn both from the successes and the failures of those who came before us. What else does the Mahāvaṃsa offer in terms of relevant insights for us today?
Well, the way it portrays royal patronage and that close relationship between the monarchy and the Sangha, it raises some really important questions about the role of leadership. How can leaders support and promote spiritual values in society? What can we learn from kings like Devadampiyatissa and Gamani? How can leaders today foster a climate of tolerance and understanding and spiritual growth, especially in a world that often feels increasingly divided and materialistic?
Those are some really great questions to ponder. It reminds us that leadership isn't just about, political power. It's also about nurturing the values and the principles that bind a society together.
Exactly. And then you have the Mahāvaṃsa's emphasis on preserving and transmitting knowledge, especially religious teachings. The Buddhist councils, the meticulous copying of texts, the dedication of the scholars, it all points to the incredible value that was placed on education and passing wisdom down through generations. That's a concept that really resonates today, especially in our world where information is so abundant, but it's also so easily manipulated.
It reminds us that knowledge is precious, something to be cherished, protected, and passed on. But with so much information out there, how do we even discern truth from falsehood these days? Does the Mahāvaṃsa offer any guidance on that?
Well, that's where critical thinking comes into play again. The Mahāvaṃsa itself, it demonstrates the importance of examining our sources, considering different perspectives, and engaging in thoughtful debate. It's not about blindly accepting the information that's presented to us. It's about actively engaging with it, questioning its origins, its motivations, and striving for a deeper understanding. In a way, the Mahāvaṃsa, by showcasing its own perspectives and biases, it inadvertently teaches us to be more discerning consumers of information, even as we appreciate its valuable insights.
It's like a meta lesson embedded within the text itself. It's not just telling us a story, it's also teaching us how to think critically about the stories that we encounter. It's amazing how this ancient text can offer such timely and thought-provoking insights. It really does remind us that history isn't just about the past. It's about understanding the forces that have shaped our world and using that knowledge to navigate the present and the future.
And that brings us to the heart of what this deep dive is all about, really. It's not just about learning facts and dates. It's about engaging with the past in a way that sparks our curiosity, challenges our assumptions, and inspires us to think more critically and creatively about the world around us.
That's a great way to put it. So as we conclude this deep dive into the Mahāvaṃsa and the story of Buddhism in Ceylon, what's the one thing that you want our listeners to walk away with? What's that final thought-provoking question that we can leave them with?
You've raised some really important points about seeking multiple perspectives and acknowledging limitations. So as a final thought, I'd ask this. The Mahāvaṃsa is just one interpretation of Buddhist history in Ceylon. How do you think other historical sources or even archaeological evidence might add to or challenge this version of events?
That's a fantastic question. It encourages our listeners to, keep exploring history, to dig deeper, to seek out those missing voices, and to always be open to new discoveries and interpretations.
Exactly. Because history is an ongoing conversation, and we all have a role to play in shaping our understanding of the past. The Mahāvaṃsa is a great starting point, but it's up to each of us to continue the journey, asking questions, seeking new perspectives, and piecing together a richer, more nuanced understanding of the world.
It's a great reminder that the journey of learning and discovery, it never truly ends. And that's what makes history so fascinating. It's like this never-ending puzzle, always waiting for us to uncover new pieces and assemble them into a more complete and vibrant picture of the past.
Well said. And the Mahāvaṃsa, with its blend of history, mythology, and Buddhist teachings, it offers such a captivating entry point into that ongoing exploration.
I completely agree. And, I have to admit, I started this deep dive knowing very little about Ceylon's history, but I'm walking away with this newfound appreciation for the rich tapestry of culture, religion, and political intrigue that really shaped this island nation.
That's the power of a good story. And a Mahāvaṃsa definitely has plenty of them.
It's been a truly enlightening journey, and I want to thank you for being such a fantastic guide through all the twists and turns of Ceylon's Buddhist history. But before we wrap up completely, I'd love to hear your thoughts on one particular detail from the outline we haven't really touched on yet, the 9-story bronze temple. What can you tell us about this, like, marvel of ancient architecture?
Yes. The Mahāvaṃsa, or the Bronze Palace, as it's sometimes called. It's a testament to the architectural ingenuity and the religious devotion of ancient Ceylon. Just imagine this towering structure, 9 stories high, its roof adorned with these shimmering bronze tiles that would have reflected the sunlight. That must have been a truly awe-inspiring sight. And it was built by King Gamani, the same king we talked about earlier, who built those magnificent stupas.
So another example of his dedication to Buddhism. It's hard to even imagine the scale and grandeur of a building like that. Was it a temple in the traditional sense?
It was more than just a temple. It was like a multifunctional complex. It housed monks. It served as a center of learning. It even included libraries and meditation halls. Sadly, the original structure was destroyed by fire. But it was rebuilt several times over the centuries, which really shows its importance as a religious and cultural landmark.
It's a reminder that even in ancient times, people possessed these remarkable architectural skills and this deep commitment to creating structures that reflected their spiritual beliefs and aspirations. It makes you want to hop on a plane right now and see if any remnants of this incredible building still stand.
Yeah, it would be amazing to see, wouldn't it?
Oh.
And while much of the Mahāvaṃsa has been lost to time, its legacy lives on in the architectural traditions of Sri Lanka and in the stories and chronicles that continue to inspire awe and wonder. It's a reminder that the past is filled with these remarkable achievements, just waiting to be rediscovered and appreciated.
Well said. And with that inspiring image in mind, I think we can bring this deep dive to a close. To our listeners, thank you for joining us on this exploration of the Mahāvaṃsa and the history of Buddhism in Ceylon. We hope it sparked your curiosity and inspired you to continue exploring the rich and complex history of this fascinating island nation. Until next time, keep those minds open and those questions coming. It's amazing, isn't it, how a deep dive into an ancient text like the Mahāvaṃsa can spark so many questions and connections to the present day. It's a real testament to the enduring power of history and its ability to offer these valuable insights into the human experience, even across, these vast stretches of time.
It really is. And I think it highlights the importance of engaging with history, not just as like a collection of facts, but as this dynamic process of exploration and interpretation. The Mahāvaṃsa offers us one lens through which to view this complex history of Buddhism in Ceylon. But there are countless other perspectives out there, waiting to be uncovered, stories waiting to be told, connections waiting to be made.
That's what makes this deep dive so exciting. It feels like we've opened this door to a fascinating world, but we've only just begun to explore it. It's a reminder that the journey of discovery, it never truly ends.
Exactly. And that's the beauty of history, right? It's this never-ending puzzle, this tapestry, woven from all these threads of human experience, just waiting for us to unravel its mysteries and piece together a more complete and vibrant understanding of our world.
I love that analogy. It makes history feel so much less like a dusty old textbook and more like an adventure, an invitation to explore and question and connect with the past in these really meaningful ways. So as we conclude this particular adventure, this deep dive into the Mahāvaṃsa and the story of Buddhism in Ceylon, is there anything else you'd like to share with our listeners? Any final thoughts or insights that you think might inspire them to continue their own explorations?
Well, I think if there's one key takeaway from our deep dive, it would be the power of perspective. The Mahāvaṃsa offers a valuable glimpse into Buddhist Ceylon, but it is just one interpretation of this very complex historical narrative. And I think it challenges us to seek out other voices, to consider alternative interpretations, and to engage with the past in this really critical and nuanced way. Remember, history is an ongoing conversation, and we all have a role to play in shaping our understanding of it. So keep asking those questions, keep exploring, and keep challenging the narratives that we've been told.
Beautifully said. And to our listeners, thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the Mahāvaṃsa. We hope it's ignited your curiosity and inspired you to continue exploring the fascinating world of Buddhist history in Ceylon. Until next time, keep those minds open and those questions coming. Welcome to another deep dive. And this time we're going to be tackling the history of Buddhism in Ceylon, specifically looking at this text called the Mahāvaṃsa,
Right.
It's kind of a chronicle. Lots of stories about kings and monks and all these events that really shaped Ceylon's destiny. And one thing that really caught my eye as I was kind of looking through this, it mentions a king who was like so devoted to Buddhism that he actually built a 9-story temple that was made entirely of bronze.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
So I think we have a lot to unpack here.